So I'd like to welcome everybody to our Thriving Nonprofits Series, Session 3, Collective Impact for Driving Systems Change. First, I'd like to thank Portia Chen Silverberg and the Thrive Alliance for Nonprofits in San Mateo County for co-sponsoring this event. And there is information about their upcoming breakfast on the back of the flyer that you have on your seat in the resource handout. As many of you know from attending previous sessions, we've created this series with specific goals in mind. The Sobrato Family Foundation believes in developing building blocks for creating greater impact in the region's nonprofits. We believe that that's critical to attracting more philanthropic resources to our Silicon Valley communities. It's also important to us, to the success of our foundation, to support programs that are having that deep impact in the community. Nope. Oh, thank you. So looking at our efforts so far, we've covered a number of topics leading up to today. As you can see from this, and you'll hear very shortly about our first speaker on the concepts of collective impact, but they build on our previous session's learnings. In particular, you'll see that the collective impact's focus on metrics and continuous learning is a topic that we explored in our February session with Tiffany Cooper-Guy. Many of you were there, and I think you all feel that it was a very valuable session. So today is going to be an opportunity to really expand on our thinking of those issues. So as you know, we always like to start by kind of getting a sense of who's in the room. So we're going to start with a couple of polling questions. Oops, wait, did I? There we go. Okay, so first, these are the instructions. Everybody needs to get their cell phones out. Ready? Does everybody have the number? No? Do I need to go back? Yeah. Okay. There we go. Do you have to write in Sobrato? Yes. All caps, or does it matter? It doesn't matter. Okay. Ready to move on? Yes. Okay. So the first question is, what is your role in your organization? A, executive director, part of the executive team. B, other staff member of the organization. Or C, board member. Okay, I think starting to level off. Nope. All right. Okay, so we can see we have a nice balance of executive team and other staff. You all could bring some more board members next time. Next question. How old is your organization? So A is less than 5 years old, B 5 to 15, C 15 to 25, and D more than 25. Interesting, again, pretty balanced. We have a couple of 25 plus year organizations, but a lot of newer ones too. Okay. Next question. What is your organization's budget size? So A, under 1 million, B, 1 to 2, C, 2 to 5, D, 5 to 10, E, over 10. Okay, interesting. Again, a pretty wide range there. And our last question. Our last question is not a multiple choice question. So those are questions that are going to be projected up. So what we'd like to know is what initial questions do you have about collective impact? Hopefully everybody has one at least. Does it work? Great. The funding models. Okay, so these are going to continue to be projected. So we'll get a good opportunity to read some of those and hopefully respond to some of the speakers will hopefully be able to respond to some of those questions. But again, we'll also have a question and answer session at the end. So you'll be able to ask the questions that weren't already answered. So this is great. While this is going on, I just also wanted to thank everyone for participating in the networking activity. You can see that we have a lot of comments on the wall. I noticed that a lot of people had listed some of the essential components for a collective impact model, so that's great. We saw a lot of comments about understanding the basic elements, and then I think we want to build on that today. So you're lucky to have some great speakers who are going to help further your knowledge on collective impact. As with our other sessions, today's session is going to be highly interactive. So you've already seen we have the polling. We're going to have a presentation very shortly by Jeff Edmondson, followed by a conversation with him and two of our other local leaders guiding collective impact efforts in our region, coming from Marin counties and Santa Clara County. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have a good amount of time for questions and answers for the audience to ask the speakers. So to start with, I'd like to welcome Jeff Edmondson to the stage for his presentation. Jeff is the Managing Director of StriveTogether, and his bio is in your packet, so for your reference later. I want to give him as much time as possible, so I'll just have you read that. We're very excited to hear from him. So without further ado, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
That is great. What a great technology. And those were really interesting too. So between the stickies over there and what's up here, hopefully I can begin to answer some of the questions, especially what is collective impact, because that would be pretty important if we're going to talk about it. And I saw that up there a few times. How's everybody doing today? All right? Good? All right. So I am going to define what it is, right, in our minds. And how many of you have read that article of collective impact, the collective impact article? Okay, that's good. Just know that for those of you that haven't read it, you're in better position than those that have. So the folks that have read it, I always say that is the most sanitized version of reality that has ever existed. They act like we all woke up in Cincinnati one morning and everybody decided to sing Kumbaya and play nicely together. And now if you go there, all student outcomes are perfect. And you want to be just like Cincinnati. And the truth of the matter is, it's been an incredibly ugly, difficult, challenging, yet rewarding process. I was the founding director of the partnership there. Last night I had the privilege of meeting with a group of folks that are all doing similar type efforts in this collective impact vein. And they were saying some of the things that they're doing, and I said, we did some of that. And we failed miserably. We did some of the things that you're doing, and we succeeded. But just know that I don't want to paint a picture that this collective impact idea is easy. I do want to paint a picture that it can be done. And so after I define what it is, I'll walk through some examples both from Cincinnati and other communities of very practically how it plays out. And then I'll share some lessons of what we now at a national level. I handed off the local work to somebody in Cincinnati about 4 years ago and run this national network of communities trying to do this work. And I'll share some lessons of what we think is most critical in order to achieve collective impact in a meaningful way, right? Not just have collective impact become another word for collaboration. All right, so that's what I'm planning to do. And then you're going to have tons of time to ask a lot of tough questions, and I'm going to let my other two colleagues on the panel answer all those, and I'll answer the softballs, which will be awesome. So my goal is just to throw out a bunch of stuff and let them handle the difficult questions. Does that sound like a plan? All right, good. So I need to click this. Here we are. All right, so StriveTogether. As I said, this whole concept of collective impact was somewhat based on the work that I had the privilege of founding in Cincinnati, but actually some folks in Albuquerque, I think, captured the problem better than anybody. They had, in a partnership they're building there called Mission Graduate, they had their newspaper involved, and they brought in the editorial cartoonist to try to capture what it is that collective impact is trying to address. And this was the cartoon that they came up with. Essentially, a lot of adults, right, pointing at each other, saying, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, but never really putting the result at the center and collectively locking arms to say, what is our role collectively in getting to the result, right? So I'm not one to talk about the problem a lot, but this slide captures it for me. And when you think about education specifically, you've got about $591 billion in public resources, $5 billion in philanthropic, and that's always an interesting number to people, right? Because we talk a lot about private philanthropy, but eventually we're going to have to get the public sector, right? But then you also have a host of nonprofits nationally working all towards this common goal, right? And so despite these investments, we're not getting the results we want. So our challenge, as it was defined in Cincinnati, we had a group of about 200 plus leaders come into the same room from all different sectors, and we were talking about how we could get a better return on investment. It was very difficult, and to try to capture what we wanted to do. And Cincinnati happens to be super philanthropic, just like the Silicon Valley here. We have one of the largest United Ways in the country, largest community foundations, a lot of money being thrown at various and sundry initiatives. And we were struggling with what to do, and it was when the coroner of our community stood up in a meeting, and he is now, by the way, the president of the local community college, so go figure that one out, right? But he stood up in the meeting, and he said, listen, folks, let me be just blunt. He said, we're not going to get to see more kids going to college, much less, I'm going to keep seeing dead kids on my table if we don't stop being program rich and system poor. He said, we are program rich and system poor. We have adopted this idea of 1,000 points of light. We've adopted this idea of what we would call spray and pray, where we're just spraying resources all over the place. We're praying good things happen, but a lot of kids and their families can't find the resources, even though I know in this room there are tons of amazing resources. Because we're more program rich than system poor, it's hard for kids and families to find those resources at the right time. Right? Early on in Cincinnati, we had a community forum, and one parent stood up and said, I was so lucky my child found this amazing Gear Up program, right? And it changed his life. And there was a grandmother sitting right next to her who was literally got up and stomped her feet and said, I'm so pissed because my child didn't find that and he's out on the street, right? That's the result of being program rich and system poor, is we don't have people able to access resources readily that may be really critical for them to succeed. So that's being program rich and system poor. So what's the solution? Well, we say it's collective impact, right? That's what we say right now. And it was interesting to me that there were a lot of people that have been in organizations over 25 years in those initial questions, or there's organizations that have been around a long time. I'm also careful to say that collective impact is not a new idea. There was some really smart person that said years ago, all great ideas failed 20 years ago, right? This is not a new idea. This is just an evolution. Right? This is an evolution of how we're approaching tackling social issues. That's all it is. And there are some differences, right? There are some differences. Right now, most communities start at what we would call isolated impact, which is at the bottom. And they've started to do collaboration, which we would say in the middle. And collective impact is essentially the top. Collective impact would be, let's not just talk to each other. Let's actually work from a common game plan, right? Let's actually have a common game plan whenever we want to move a common outcome. So for those of you that haven't read the article, you don't have to. This is what the article says. Okay? So this is what we would say, though, the difference is between collaboration and collective impact in as concrete terms as we can possibly make it, right? Because there has to be a difference. My background is I worked in the Peace Corps, where I was in Gabon, Central Africa. I was there for 4 years, and I was there to do fish farming in a country that's about 1 million people, the size of about Colorado, and it's 90% rainforest. So I was there to do fish farming in a country that's 90% rainforest. Let me let that set in for a second. Okay? So essentially, if we ever needed fish, we could just put a trap in the creek behind our house and get plenty of fish to eat. But somebody had made the decision along the way that fish farming was needed in Gabon because it was needed in Congo, which is a neighboring country, right? That's how we made that decision. I then worked in a high school, the Washington, D.C.'s largest public high school. I was called the Peaceable Schools Coordinator. They thought that would be perfect, right? Because I had peace in my title before. And they're like, you're going to be great at this, right? And in that school, we had over 100 programs and services operating for kids. And I pulled them on one day, Tuesday, and they said they were serving over 2,000 kids, but there were only about 1,400 kids in the building, right? So the question became, how are we organizing our resources in order to achieve better results? I then worked for a nonprofit for a while, and I saw some of the competitive landscape there. I worked for a public official for a little bit while I got a master's in policy, and then I ended up at a foundation. So my passion is that all of these sectors have to work together. Because quite frankly, if they're not working together, we're going to continue to spray and pray. So I was a part of tons of collaboratives in that journey, tons of different collaborations. And I wouldn't be doing this if I wanted to be a part of another collaboration. So there has to be a difference between collaboration and collective impact. So here's the 4 differences. One is in collaboration, we're often convening about programs, right? Usually an RFP. Somebody puts out an RFP, people come together, we split it up, and we implement our work. But we pretty much do the same thing we've always been doing, right? We just split it up, right? With collective impact, you're focused on results and outcomes. So typically when people come together, they're not coming together around a new pot of money. They're coming together to move a dial. So kindergarten readiness, early grade reading, middle grade math, high school graduation, college entrance, completion, something. But when you bring people together, there has to be a true north. That was our number 1 lesson in Cincinnati. We started to do asset maps of everything in our community, and then we'd create a catalog, and we realized as soon as we published the catalog, it was outdated, right? It was outdated. So it was the head of our United Way that happened to say, we need a true north. We keep just asset mapping our way to paradise, and we're not getting anywhere. So we need to get focused on outcomes, not dollars. And that was a huge first step. So that's a big difference between collaboration and collective impact. Next is that you're not using data just to prove things, you're using data to improve things. Huge difference, right? Most of the time in the social sector, not just in education, but writ large, data is used as a hammer, right? To beat people up. You either won or you lost, and then you're done, right? That idea is ridiculous. There isn't a single good organization in the public or private sector that really operates effectively that uses data in that manner alone, right? There does have to be some accountability, but in the end, data is being used to improve all the time. It's being used as a flashlight in order to highlight what's working and build on our successes. I'll talk more about that later, but that's another huge difference. If you're not using data at the programmatic level, and I'll give examples in a minute, if you're not using data at the programmatic level to identify what practices work for kids, you're not doing collective impact. You're just not. All right? Next is it shouldn't be in addition to what you do, it should be what you do. Now I saw one of the questions that came up here was, how do you create time for collective impact? Initially, there has to be some time put in to get agreement around the vision, around the outcomes, but over time, if you ever come to a collective impact meeting, it should just inform what you do every day, not be extra work. All right? So meaning, if you are focused on kindergarten readiness and you deliver services and you come to a meeting on kindergarten readiness, somebody should be in that meeting slipping you data on practices that work locally in early childhood. So you can do what you do every day better, not add one more thing to the table. Does that make sense? So I told you I worked at that high school. Our principal, who only showed up a couple days a week, but that's another story. He would come to the school every once in a while, and he would pull us together, right? He would pull us together, and he would always say, I've got this great new thing I want you to be a part of. Guess what everybody in the room would do? Actually, they'd dive under the table, right? And then I would be the only one sitting there, be like, the peaceable guy can do that. This is awesome. You're on it, right? So my job became the guy that did all the collaborations, right? And very rarely did I go there and get information that helped the teachers. My wife was one of the teachers there, right? The teachers do anything better, right? It most of the time was, we want you as the school to do one more thing here. That's not what collective impact should be. It shouldn't lead to one more thing. It should lead to helping you do what you do every day better. Does that make sense? Right? Last, it shouldn't be about advocating for ideas anymore. It should not be about advocating for ideas. It should be about advocating for what works. Right? How many of you have read the book Switch? Switch? Okay, I recommend this book heavily. Spend all your time reading that instead of the collective impact article, okay? This book is fantastic, and it talks about finding bright spots, right? Finding bright spots and building on successes. And when we see collective impact take off, it's when community members are identifying what works in their community. I told this story last night, but I was just in Phoenix. And they have a partnership. It's called StriveTogether. And it's just, it's really doing a fabulous job. But one of the things they realized, they were getting stuck because nobody could figure out how to get beyond the outcomes they'd identified, which were 6 outcomes. They said, we're going to move these outcomes. And they couldn't figure out how to take that next step. Finally, somebody said, do we have any bright spots? And everybody looked at the schools that they'd always been looking at. But all of a sudden, somebody said, you know what? There's this little school district over here, Cartwright, right? It has schools that are 90% free and reduced lunch, 90% Latino, bilingual, right? 90% just about any other challenge that you could think thrown their direction, and 90% of the kids were on target developmentally by grade 3, right? So instead of spinning their wheels, they're actually over there looking at that school, working with the principals, working with the superintendents, bringing principals that want to come along to learn from what's going on at Bellefontaine High School, or not Bellefontaine, Beaufort High School, something like that, in Cartwright School District, right? That's powerful. That is powerful. So it's not about some new idea that you heard about in LA or New York. It's about finding what works and then building on it right here in your own backyard. That's what collective impact's about. Does this make sense? Okay, I'd ask for questions, but I'm not going to do that. So I don't really care what your questions are. I'm just going to keep going. No, just kidding. Jot them down or put them up there. We're gonna run back up the rolling screen so you can keep texting in your questions if you want. But I promise we'll get to as many. But there you go. That is, in our minds, the difference between collaboration and collective impact. All right? So I'm now going to give you a few examples. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Cincinnati, but also bring in some stories from other communities across the country about how this really plays out on the ground. Does that sound helpful? I'm not feeling you guys right now. Yeah. All right. Here we go. Preach it. All right. So this is the logos in Cincinnati. My bet is that you'd see a lot of the same logos here in your region, right? You got a United Way, a chamber, got the school districts, obviously. In our case, we had to have parochial school districts for sure, because they serve a ton of kids. Cincinnati's super Catholic, right? You had to have the early childhood community is represented, the higher ed community for sure, major nonprofits, major philanthropic organizations, major businesses. I throw this up here because a lot of people say, every community is different, and we would totally agree with that. You're going to have to contextualize this for whatever your community looks like. But a lot of the players look the same, right? A lot of the players look the same. So the question is, how do you bring all these folks to the table? Well, we had to come together around a rallying cry. And for us, it was outcomes. And I would say one thing definitively about collective impact: if you do not have your outcomes identified, and if you do not report them publicly, you will not be able to do collective impact. I just can't. There is no community that I can point to across the country. I think you would agree with me. I don't know in your experience, but if you do not publicly share your data on where you are, you lose sight of it, and all of a sudden the turf wars and all kinds of politics get in the way of trying to achieve collective impact. So our first major insight was we needed a cool vision, and it took us about 4 years to figure this out. Our first vision was something like, all the adults in the community are going to work together in order to help kids do this and that, and then we're going to do this together, and then we're going to do that, and it's going to be awesome, and then all of a sudden everything's going to be better. Finally, we realized we needed a tight vision, right? Every child, every step of the way. Don't focus on the adults, focus on the kids. That's what we're all about. But more importantly, we realized we needed a set of outcomes, and we needed to report them all the time, openly and transparently, right? And the risk there on the part of the superintendents in particular, who always get beat up, is if I report my data, I'm just going to get beat up again, right? So what we had to do was have the head of Procter & Gamble right? Or we had to have the head of the chamber, or we had to have the head of the higher ed institution, or we had to have somebody else, the head of a major nonprofit, present the data instead of the school districts in order to say we all own these outcomes. It is not just on them. It is on all of us. So every year now, we're on our 5th report card. You'll see green arrows going up and red arrows going down. And the role of the partnership is to figure out why are the green arrows going up, right? What's underneath that? And why are the red arrows going down? And our job is to figure out how we could collectively tackle that. Now, I say collectively somewhat cautiously, because in the end, collective impact is more about the individual and the organization, right, behaving differently than it is about collective organizations behaving differently. But I'm going to talk about that later. A little foreshadowing there for you, all right? But this is critical. You can't do this if every year you're not willing to be transparent about where you are as a community, right? Next thing that's critical is organizing yourself into an ecosystem. Organizing yourselves into an ecosystem where everybody can see themselves, right? Everybody that's authentically wanting to engage, not the traditional bomb throwers, but the people that are authentically wanting to engage, you want them to be able to see themselves in this work, right? So this comes from Northeast Indiana, where they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a single big goal. They have 6 outcomes they track, but they have a big goal around college completion, college and certification completion, right? And then they have a leadership council. They have a leadership council that's got the key leadership of the community with their fingers on the button, that they get engaged, right? And they support this. They've got their second in commands, the people who actually do all the work. Are there any CEOs in here? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, right? But the people that were second, they get together, because in the end you need the organizations doing things differently. And if you don't have the people that are managing the staff and bought in on this, it's not going to work. Right? Because then it's just going to be a CEO level commitment, and the organizations aren't going to really do anything differently, right? And then they have networks around each outcome area, right? Around early childhood. And then they have 2 or 3 networks, right? Multiple schools working together. Maybe a group that's working on 0 to 3, right? Whatever it is. But they have multiple little networks formed, and they're all focused on using data effectively, and that's what the partnership team provides. Does that make sense? The backbone staff, right? That's what they provide. So does that make sense? But the key is to create an ecosystem. And I use that term. I was a biology major in college, which made sense when I went to fish farming, but it doesn't seem to make as much sense now. But now that I realize what this work is really all about, it is about building an ecosystem, right? It is about trying to make sense of all the disparate pieces so that they fit together. And we see communities visualize this in 100 different ways. Some are more hierarchical, right? They need the leadership at the top. Some are exactly the opposite. They want the leadership at the bottom, right? They want the networks at the top. We've seen 100 different ways for people to visualize this, but if you don't have a way for people to see themselves in it, right, and then actually operationalize it, then it goes nowhere. Does that make sense? All right, here's a different one. This is from Salt Lake City, the Promise Partnerships piece. They actually have community schools, so they have school-based work where there's resource coordinators in schools who are traffic copying resources to make sure that kids are actually getting the resources they need, right? So they have an early warning system so that it flags kids that are behind. And then the job of the resource coordinator is to say, hey, we need you to go work with Jamal, right? Or we need you to go work with Sally. Go, right? That's their job. That's the school level work. Then they also have neighborhood-based work, right? They have neighborhood-based work where across multiple schools, they have a local team, right? Could be the faith leaders, could be other civic leaders, whatever it is, but they are monitoring the work across multiple schools to make sure that we're actually making progress. And then they have a regional team. They have a regional team across multiple districts. The key is that all of them are focused on the same set of outcomes. All of them. So at every single level, if you talk to anybody at the school level, the neighborhood level, and the regional level, they'd all say, we're focused on 6 outcomes, and now we're focused on these 2. That's what we're working on, right? So they have agreement on that, and they're organized into an ecosystem that enables that enables everybody to see themselves in the work. Does that make sense? All right, so just another example of how communities are organizing themselves. All contextualized, right? You got to figure out the right way to organize yourselves, but these are just a couple examples. So that was a big number 2 step, was figuring out how to organize ourselves. Then the trick became, how do we actually use data? How do we actually use data? Right? And this is an example from Dallas. And what Dallas did, and Dallas is humongous, right? They plotted all of their elementary schools, free and reduced lunch at the bottom and performance on top. And they took this to a community meeting, and they said, this is exactly what we'd expect, unfortunately. 50% achievement gap here, only 15% there, right? And most communities stop right there when it comes to using data. And they just admire the problem. And everybody says, oh. And then they go back and do the exact same thing they've been doing all the time. Right? Does that sound familiar? So what they said was, you know what? Why don't we go try to learn from these schools up here, similar to the story I just told in Phoenix, and why don't we find the willing principals of schools that are down here? So they found some willing principals here. And why don't we make sure that they're learning from each other? Why don't we make sure that they're learning from each other? So the job of the backbone staff became to facilitate a knowledge exchange across those principles and to build action plans for how what was happening up here could be applied down here, right? So here's sort of a rough example of what they actually did together, and this is rough, right? But this is 3 schools that were down at the bottom, right? They learned from the schools up top, right? But notice down here, it doesn't say 2011, 12, 13, 14. It says January, February, March, April, right? And they have figured out now how in their school to do benchmark assessments to actually track how students are performing. But then they've gone even a step further than that, not just to understand how they're performing, but to actually understand if their interventions can be connected to the performance. And that's where we often miss out. And this is where, quite frankly, collective impact risks to die. Because if we keep trying to do collective impact by just looking at the community level data and assuming something magical is going to happen, but we don't actually look at the way that the adults, all of us, are contributing to whatever's happening up here, we're going to be in trouble. So they looked and they said, you know what? We're going to take an action step, and we're going to bring in tutors that worked after the school day typically. We're going to bring them into the school day. Because we saw in some of the higher performing schools, they were building small learning circles for kids that were far behind in the classrooms. So the tutoring programs were now integrated into the school day rather than after the school day. Does that make sense? And they said, great, so we're going to try that. And look, they figured out by February they were really getting a lot more personalized attention. That's wonderful. One of them said, you know what? We're going to try to pull the kids out of the classroom. And unfortunately, look what happened. Right? We're going to try to pull them out of the classroom. But the kids, for whatever reason, maybe they felt ostracized, who knows what, but it went down. So rather, though, than them finding that out in May or June or July or worse, August or October of next year, they knew right away, so they could course correct, right? They could course correct. Does that make sense? So the whole idea being, we can now use data on an ongoing basis in order to understand what does and does not work. If I had known this a year ago, or if I'd known this 9 years ago, we would be doing work completely different in Cincinnati. I'll tell you that right now. But quite frankly, some of the questions that scrolled up there were, what makes this worth it? Is there a return for this? Is there a there? Is it just a buzzword? The answer to those could be maybe, and yes. If the answer is going to be yeah, no, and yes, right? It's going to all depend on whether or not everybody in this room is willing to look at data at this level. Because if we in the social sector continue to just operate on the assumption, using primarily our hearts, right? On the assumption that what we're doing works, and most of it probably does, but some of it may need to be tweaked. And we have to be willing to think differently about that, right? We have to be open to that. All right, so I've only got a couple more minutes, so I'm going to speed ahead here. This is just an interesting point. In Dallas, they do a survey of all of their giving every year. They survey, like the 50 largest fundraisers, and they found that there was an increase in spending in early childhood, but their scores went down, right? And they found that there was a decrease in spending in middle years, but the scores went up. This just reinforces this other thing of we admire the problem. They would have typically looked at this and just said, oh, snap. Right? But instead they say, no, we need to figure out what's going on here, right? So the purpose of the partnership in Dallas, the Commit partnership, is to figure that out. So they use this as a rallying cry, right? To say, how can we figure out what's going on here? That's the purpose of the partnership. That's what makes collective impact worth it. All right. So there's a science to this, and I'm not going to have time to go through it. I am just going to share with you that there are some success stories in Cincinnati right now. Due to the individual and collective efforts of the partners, we're seeing the major outcomes trending in the right direction, right? And this has not been from starting 100 new initiatives. This is from being disciplined about using data, right? That's what this is about. So the community as a whole, whenever a funder puts out an RFP now, they ask, how is the work that you're doing contributing to the outcomes we care about, right? When the nonprofits are putting together a proposal, they're looking at programmatic data and demonstrating how what they're doing actually connects to the outcome and how they're learning from the data, right? That's what this is from. And it doesn't mean the partnership is doing anything. I want to reiterate that. The partnership is sometimes doing hardly anything, right? In one case, Cincinnati Public Schools turned around 13 of the lowest performing 16 schools in the district. The partnership had nothing to do with that. The partnership's role was to say, wow, what did you do? And how can we learn from that and take it to the parochial schools or take it to the other schools so that more people can be doing that, right? That's the role of the partnership. Does that make sense? So here's a few other communities that have really dug deep on specific outcomes: Portland, Dallas, Seattle, Albuquerque, Fresno, Tacoma, Milwaukee, and now Anchorage just got started, but they've really dug deep. They just started like 9 months ago, and they have dug deep on kindergarten readiness, and they're already seeing a trend in the right direction just because people are being more focused on data, right? That's all there is to it. They're just focused. It's not that they're starting any new initiatives. They're just actually digging into what does and does not work. So 3 quick lessons. First, partnerships move at the speed of trust, right? So I told this story last night, and I'll tell it again, but when I worked in Cincinnati, probably the best advice I ever got when I was about to pull my hair out, and my hair did start turning gray, not just because I have 2 sets of twins, right, which I do, so I just want you all to sympathize with me. So if you did not like my presentation, rate it highly just because my wife is amazing, all right? So, but what she said to me, what the head of the partnership, Nancy Zimpfer, who's just an incredible advocate she said, Jeff, you're spending 90% of your time on the 10% of people that won't come along. She said, if you just focus on the people that will, the coalition of the willing, we can start moving and build that trust. But as long as I stayed focused on the people who were the naysayers, the bomb throwers, the people that just did not want to come along, I was going to be in big trouble, right? So you got to bring those people along. And then you've got to have those difficult, challenging, real conversations to say, maybe what I'm doing right now has to be tweaked a little bit. And not be so married to your program model that you forget the outcome, right? Next is that you can't use data as a hammer. You got to use it as a flashlight. So in any effort you're trying to do, the more you can lift up the bright spots, as they say in Switch, the more you can lift up those bright spots and actually learn from what they're doing and then apply it, the better off you're going to be. And then the last lesson, we'll be done and we'll come up and take questions, is that we've over-accentuated the collective in collective impact. Okay, and this is just so important, is that people assume when they're part of collective impact, they can show up at a meeting once a month and somehow that meeting is going to happen, and then the staff, right, are going to just miraculously figure out how to turn the population level dial. And I was with that staff for a while, and I quite frankly burned out because everybody was looking at me and my team, my small team, to try to make the population level dial move. And what we've now realized is that actually collective impact depends equally on the individuals and the organizations. So the magic of collective impact is not what happens in that monthly or quarterly meeting. The magic of collective impact is what the individuals and the organizations do differently every day between the meetings. And there is nothing more important than that. Typical collaboration is we meet in the basement of a church or a library, and somehow that work is going to lead to whatever amazing result that the funder wanted us to get in their RFP. That's not how it works, right? That's not how it's going to work. In order to achieve collective impact, it would require everybody in this room and all the other logos that need to be involved to actually be introspective and look at what they're doing every day, every single day, differently. So I think this is a really big difference. So I just can't reiterate it enough. So communities right now stop looking at the staff and they start having individuals say, I could actually advocate everywhere I go for this. Every time I speak, I could make part of my speech or part of my spiel, I'm a part of this partnership, and here's the 5 outcomes we want to move, and here's how I plug in, right? An organization could say, I'm going to be willing to have the trust to share my programmatic data, and I'm actually going to look at what I do every day differently as a result of looking at the programmatic data, and I'm going to trust that funders are not going to yank my cash, right? And then collectively, we still need to agree on these common outcomes, and we need to advocate for policies that will support what works, right? But it's not only about the collective, it's about the individual and organizational as well. Does that make sense? So the key would be is to challenge yourself to say, what could I be doing differently every day, not assuming that some sort of miraculous collective thing is going to happen because we meet every once in a while, and to ask yourself these questions all the time. What could I be doing individually different in order to achieve that result? What could I be doing organizationally different to achieve that result? And what could we be doing collectively? But don't just depend on the collective, because I can tell you, you'll look at the headlines in 3 years and they'll be exactly the same as they are right now. All right, so that's it. I think we answered all the questions that came up on the, so I think we're done. Is that right? Oh, okay, thank you. That was nice of you. Thank you. All right.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thank you. Or you can just
Sit up here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grab one of these seats. Thanks so much, Jeff. I think not only did you demystify the understanding of collective impact, but also I think it's safe to say that you lit a fire. Certainly there was quite a spark here, and I think I'm looking forward to a continued conversation around that. So at this point, I'd like to invite our other panelists to the stage. Ann Matheison of Marin Promise Partnership and Joe Herrity of the Santa Clara County Opportunity Youth Partnership. Actually, I think they want me to sit here, but I don't know why. Their bios are in the materials, so I'll let you look at that at your leisure. But first, a couple more polling questions I wanted to project. Okay, wait, oops. There we go. Great. So the first question, my organization struggles with effectively using data due to A, lack of capacity know-how, B, lack of access to key data held by others, C, lack of funding to support effort, D, internal resistance to using data, E, we don't struggle with using data effectively, or F, other.
G, all the above?
Okay, interesting. So we have a couple different answers, but certainly A seems to be the most dominant. That's interesting.
I want to talk to the 4 that don't struggle. Raise your hands.
Okay, next question. My organization actively collects programmatic level data in order to change and improve how we deliver services to our clients on an ongoing basis. Yes, sometimes, or no. Okay, great. And the last question, One more time. Nope. Should we just let it go? Okay. The last question is my organization, just so that you know, my organization would be interested in participating in larger efforts to collect data in a collaborative and coordinated way. So how about we just cheer a little bit if you'd be interested in that. So come on. I think we had a little spark here today. All right, great. Okay, so now I'd like to thanks so much, Anne and Joe, also for joining us on the stage. Again, you'll have an opportunity to ask them questions as well. But I thought we would start with a couple of questions first. Anne, you and your organization, Marin Promise, are part of the national StriveTogether network that Jeff was describing earlier. Can you talk a little bit about how you went from being a community volunteer and leader in Marin to starting Marin Promise and becoming its founding leader? What compelled you to reorganize your life in this way? And then what is Marin Promise hoping to achieve?
Great, thanks. So I got lured into it by the article that Jeff told everybody not to read because it was, very compelling. And given my background, I have a business degree. I volunteered to found a nonprofit to get low-income kids to college in San Francisco for years. Spent 8 years on a school board, and then 8 years on our local community foundation, Marin Community Foundation, up in Marin. And so when I read the article about collective impact, I was like, all of these perspectives that I've been working at this same issue of trying to get low-income kids to college are coming together miraculously. So I started trying to bring people in my own community together around this idea. And over the last 3 years have discovered that it is quite a bit harder than the article made it sound. But still, we've made enough progress, and it's continues to inspire me now to really put the goals and the outcomes at the center of what we're doing and talking about, and using data to try to move the outcomes.
Great, thank you. And Joe, likewise, you're a little bit earlier on in the process with the Santa Clara County Opportunity Youth Partnership, but you worked at another nonprofit focused on youth criminal justice issues, and then now you're the project manager for the OYP. So what problem is this effort trying to solve, and how do you see the collective impact approach as the tool needed to address it?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to back up first because I feel like I'm not looking at this side of the room. A couple things in that question. So this is us. So the issue that we're focusing on is education and employment outcomes for Opportunity Youth. And Opportunity Youth is kind of the buzzword that has moved down from the national level now to OYP in Santa Clara County. And Opportunity Youth are those young folks 16 to 24 who are disconnected from both school and work. So really some of the most vulnerable young people in our community. And in the Santa Clara County Opportunity Youth Partnership, we have focused on 4 subpopulations of that broader Opportunity Youth population, specifically those young folks who have experienced the foster system, the juvenile justice system, homelessness, or who are pregnant/parenting. And we're really looking to see movement, those 2 big goals there, a 10% reduction in the dropout rate and a 10% increase in the youth employment rate. Our funding, or our original funding, has come from the Aspen Institute, and they've really, the conversation that we're having is around pathways, developing very clear, well-articulated pathways that allow a young person who is disconnected to re-engage in their secondary education, find the appropriate post-secondary education and training that allows them to then access what we're calling career potential employment. For young folks, for Opportunity Youth who have experienced these systems, who are disconnected, the road back is scattered, fragmented, and the road back itself is disconnected. So our work is to really connect the road and ensure a really clear pathway that a young person can navigate, and their support systems can help them to navigate.
Great, thank you. And for my next question, I'll ask the both of you, and then I'll have Jeff build on that, because I think we've heard some of this from him already. But I'll start with you, and how would you articulate the benefits of the collective impact model in your community and what you've seen so far? What type of change has it brought?
I would answer that probably on two levels. One of the huge benefits is to create this ecosystem, in a way for people to organize themselves and thinking about how they fit into making sure kids are successful cradle to career. So it's kind of that big macro benefit. But then we've really launched our efforts in 2 action teams at the college end of the continuum. And I think the real benefits that we've seen on the ground are school districts and nonprofits actually working together towards a common goal. Because all too often, I think in the past, the nonprofits who are very well intentioned are all, maybe 20 of them, knocking on the doors of the school principal saying, I want to help you, I want to help you, I want to help your kids. And the principals want to use all those resources, but they don't know how. So as a collective, we're now talking at the same table about the same issues. So for the first time ever in Novato, for example, we were able to bring the collaborative of the nonprofits into the classroom to talk about financial aid support for kids going to college all at one time, and then track those results, follow up on the results as a collaborative, which is game-changing for what was going on before.
Great, thanks. And Joe, likewise, can you talk a little bit about the change that you've seen in the community as a result?
Yeah, and so I've been with this project for 8 months. So I'm sort of like a walking lesson in like, oh, don't do that. Definitely do that. So some of the things that, or I guess what I would say in my short time that I've seen to be the real key is, I mean, it's the entity that sort of holds that global view, the opportunity to convene folks. In the nonprofit sector, everybody is nose down quite often, trying to make do with never enough resources. So I think somebody holding that space with a clear intention to foster the dialogue, that would be the big early win for us. And we're very early in our partnership, just about 2 years in. So creating the space for people who operated within the silo of the system, of the young people they're serving, they're now beginning to look across the systems. And then the next big piece was getting a baseline data collection executed across 9 partner agencies, and now we're coming up on the second round of data collection. So there's never been in Santa Clara County a county-wide look at opportunity youth across all of these systems, and so we were able to get the first county-wide data collection done.
Great, thank you. I'd actually like to jump to the next question, because I think Joe's comments sort of segue into that. Partners, what's the strategy and the process for identifying the right partners? Is there, a recipe? Jeff, maybe we can start with you. We've seen, the kind of the range of the partners, but how did you start? And then in addition, you mentioned backbone organizations, but I think it would be helpful to hear a little bit more about, what that backbone organization should be, or, what it might look like.
Yeah, so in order to identify the partners, it has to be a very disciplined, extremely thoughtful process of sort of identifying by sector who are all the players that connect, that you know of at least, to connect to the outcome that you care about. And then really outlining 2 things. What are the assets that they bring to the table? Do they bring access to data? Do they bring access to money? Do they have influence? Do they do service delivery? What are the assets they bring to the table? And then the second thing is, what is their enlightened self-interest? Like, why would they want to be involved in this? What would help them in order to succeed and achieve their mission by being a part of this? And when you start to map that out, you can begin to formulate the ecosystem that you think may need to be created. And I just want to say that one of the lessons that we often hear from folks is that you have to slap draft on every single article you create, or every single document you create, for like 3 years, because it constantly evolves, right? The ecosystem is not fixed. There's new things that come into the equation. And if you really map out, though, who those players are, what are the assets they bring, what is their enlightened self-interest, you can start to formulate that and then bring people along, because they understand that you're grasping their individual interests and the collective interest, right? And then on the backbone, we actually have decided pretty definitively in our minds that the concept of a backbone organization is false. There is no one organization that can make collective impact happen. What you have is a backbone function. And I know that sounds somewhat, like I'm playing with words, but it's a really important one because I saw a couple of the questions that came up at the beginning were, how do I engage? How do you staff this? A lot of communities try to raise like $25 million and have this huge backbone staff. What's best is if you identify the different functions that are needed, like you need a data function, right? You need an advocacy function. You need all kinds of different roles, communications function. There are different entities that could come together and play those roles, right? And they could be held accountable for playing those roles, right? Define what those roles are very clearly and then have a clear way to hold them accountable for that. I will say you need a few core staff, right? You do need the staff to sit somewhere. Needs to be a neutral place. Can't be one that thinks they've figured out all the solutions. Can't be a place where they deliver programs because nobody will trust that they're not going to take their program, as the godsend to everybody. But so you do need, we call it chief cat herder, right? The person who wakes up every day. That's what I did in Cincinnati, just trying to make sure that people don't scratch each other to death, right? And then you got to have the data analyst. You have to have somebody whose full-time job it is to think about the data infrastructure. You have to have facilitators that work with programs to make sure that they're able to use the programmatic data. But those folks just need to sit somewhere, and then they can work with other partners to do the other functions, right? So that would be sort of how it ends up looking in most communities after they've kind of fumbled around trying to figure it out for a while, right?
Can I follow up on that? With a backbone organization not delivering programs, are there any lessons learned, things that you've seen, just a little more detail about why that doesn't work?
The primary reason it doesn't work is not because the organization doesn't have pure and right interests, right? They could be completely perfect for the job in many, many ways, but over time, when you're asking people to look at programmatic data, right, people are going to question whether or not the programs that entity runs are really going to take an honest look at themselves. Now, if you landed in a place where a program provider needed to be the house of the backbone staff, then that organization would probably have to come out pretty transparently, pretty quickly, and be very honest about their programmatic data. And if they were doing something, they'd have to say that what we're doing is not working, if it is not working. But honestly, we've found that works very rarely. Most of the time, you need a very neutral entity in order to lead this work. And hopefully, you can kind of embed it somewhere, like embed it at the chamber, or embed it at a United Way, or at a community foundation, or a family foundation. You can kind of put it somewhere. They don't have the family foundation's email address, right? It wouldn't be edmondsonj@foundation.org. It would be edmondsonj@thrivingtogether.org or missiongraduate.org. So it becomes about the partnership, not about the entity where the staff are being housed.
Great, thank you.